At my father's black tie birthday gala, my brother poured wine on my dress and shouted, "You are a parasite." Everyone stared like I was nothing. Then the federal judge stood up, looked around the room, and said, "You people really do not know who she is?" Silence swallowed the entire ballroom. My brother went pale when the judge said, "She is the one who." That was the exact moment the earth shifted under my family's perfectly manicured feet. But let me slow down and bring you into the room with me, so you can feel the absolute chill of that evening. I was standing near the grand center table, surrounded by 200 of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city. Politicians, real estate tycoons, old money heirs, and corporate lawyers, they were all there, holding crystal glasses of champagne that cost more than my first car. The ballroom was a sea of silk, diamonds, and suffocating arrogance. The string quartet in the corner had just finished playing a classical piece, the final notes lingering in the humid, perfume-scented air, when I felt the violent, icy shock of liquid hitting my chest. It was a vintage red wine, violently dark, bleeding into the fabric of the simple black dress I had bought off a clearance rack years ago. The sound of the heavy crystal glass abruptly pulling away echoed like a gunshot. I did not scream. I did not gasp. I did not raise my hand to strike him back, even though every nerve in my body was screaming for violence. I just stood there, feeling the cold red drops sliding down my collarbone, soaking through my clothes, chilling my skin. My brother, Declan, stood mere inches from me. His expensive, bespoke tailored suit was flawless. His hair was perfectly styled, and his mouth was twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. "You are a parasite," he spat, his voice carrying perfectly over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted the mayor, the city council members, and the banking executives to witness my destruction. "You do not belong here. You never did. You are a complete embarrassment to the Thatcher name." The massive ballroom froze. The clinking of silverware stopped. No one moved to hand me a napkin. No one told him to step back or calm down. I looked past Declan's shoulder and found my father, Thatcher. He was sitting on a raised dais under a massive gold and silver banner celebrating his 70th birthday. My father did not look angry at Declan for assaulting a woman in public. He looked annoyed at me. He looked at me as if my humiliation was merely a frustrating interruption to his perfect, expensive evening. Beside him, my mother, Sybil, simply lowered her eyes to her empty porcelain plate, pretending she was blind to the cruelty happening 10 feet away. For years, this was my exact role in the family ecosystem. I was the designated punching bag, the scapegoat, the invisible child who supposedly failed at everything. They wanted everyone in that room to believe I was a pathetic, unstable single mother desperate for their spare change. I tasted the bitter wine on my lips, copper and oak, and I let the silence stretch. I let them enjoy their temporary, pathetic victory. But the beautiful thing about silence is that it leaves plenty of room for the truth to eventually echo. I shifted my gaze to table number 4, positioned right at the front near the stage. Sitting there was Judge Calloway, a federal judge whose reputation for ruthlessness in the courtroom could make grown corporate men tremble. She slowly placed her linen napkin on the table. The sound of her heavy wooden chair scraping against the polished marble floor pierced the quiet room like an air raid siren. She slowly stood up to her full height, smoothing her jacket, her sharp eyes locked entirely on my brother. What happened next would change the trajectory of my family's legacy forever, but before I tell you what the federal judge did to utterly destroy my brother's pride, I have to ask. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by your own blood? Have you ever had to stand completely alone while your toxic family tore you apart? Let me know down in the comments, because I read every single one. The judge took a slow, deliberate step forward, and I watched the arrogant smirk on Declan's face begin to tremble. It took a lifetime of systemic disrespect and emotional neglect to build up to that catastrophic moment in the ballroom. You see, being the chosen scapegoat in a wealthy, image-obsessed family is a very specific, invisible kind of torture. It is not about physical bruises that people can see and pity. It is about the daily, systematic erasure of your self-worth and your reality. Let me take you on a quick tour through my personal museum of pain. When I was 16 years old, Declan took his brand new, ridiculously expensive sports car out for a midnight joyride. He had been drinking heavily at a country club party, and he wrapped the car around a telephone pole, completely totaling it. He walked away without a single scratch, but the vehicle was a crushed cube of metal. My parents did not ground him. They did not take away his privileges. They did not make him get a minimum wage job to pay for the damages. My father simply patted his shoulder, handed the police officer a very thick envelope, called it a learning experience, and bought Declan an even more expensive car exactly 3 days later. That same year, I was working 3 grueling part-time jobs just to pay for my college applications and entrance exams, because my father firmly stated that building character meant paying my own way in the world. I clearly remember sitting at our massive mahogany dining table one evening. I had just received my acceptance letter to a top-tier accounting program, earning a partial scholarship through sheer academic grit. I placed the letter on the table, my heart pounding with a desperate hope for validation. Sybil, my mother, casually moved my acceptance letter aside to make room for a massive silver platter of roast beef. She served the largest, tenderest slice to Declan, who had just failed out of his first semester of a basic business management course. Thatcher looked at me over the rim of his expensive reading glasses and sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Accounting, Sloane? Really? It is so incredibly unimaginative. You have absolutely zero vision. Your brother is going to run a global empire one day, and you are going to spend your miserable life counting other people's pennies in a cubicle. That was the unbreakable dynamic of our household. Declan was the golden child, the chosen heir. He was charming, he looked the part of a future chief executive officer, and he knew exactly how to manipulate my parents' massive egos. If he made a colossal mistake, the world was simply unfair to him. If I achieved something massive against all odds, it was dismissed as pure luck, or worse, it was insulted for being boring and beneath the family's prestige. I learned very early on that my success was actively offensive to them because it cast a harsh light on Declan's constant failures. So, I learned to stay quiet. I became a ghost in my own home. I kept my head down, studied late into the night until my eyes burned, and built my life in the shadows while Declan basked in the blinding spotlight of their conditional love. I foolishly thought that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved my competence beyond a shadow of a doubt, eventually they would respect me. I was completely, utterly wrong. Toxic families do not reward hard work. They exploit it. They keep you around just long enough to use you as a dumping ground for their own insecurities, and the second you threaten their perfect, manufactured illusion, they throw you to the wolves without a second thought. I survived the blatant favoritism for years. I survived the snide comments about my cheap clothes and the way they conveniently forgot to attend my college graduation. I could have lived with being the invisible daughter forever, finding peace in my own independence. But the real betrayal, the absolute destruction of my family ties, did not happen over dinner table insults. It happened when I stumbled across a massive, terrifying secret hiding in plain sight. I was about to uncover a web of lies worth $2 million, and finding that dirty money would cost me everything I had. 7 years before the nightmare of the birthday gala, I was working as a junior internal accountant at my father's commercial real estate firm. It was a massive, sprawling company dealing with multi-million-dollar properties, shopping centers, and high-rise developments across the state. Despite my stellar degree, I was given a tiny, cramped desk in a windowless office near the basement, far away from the executive suites. They paid me a miserable entry-level salary, but I swallowed my pride and took the job because I desperately wanted to prove myself to Thatcher. I wanted him to see my undeniable value. Declan, on the other hand, was instantly handed the title of Director of Procurement. He was fully in charge of hiring contractors, managing massive building renovations, and paying the vendors. He walked around the glass-walled office like a royal prince, wearing imported watches that cost more than my entire annual salary. My job was just to silently log the heavy stacks of vendor invoices into the corporate system. It was supposed to be mindless, robotic data entry. But I was not mindless. I was a highly trained financial analyst, and my brain naturally notices discrepancies and patterns. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the office was quiet, and I was reviewing a thick batch of invoices for a major downtown plaza renovation project. I noticed a vendor named Apex Supplies. They were regularly billing our firm for hundreds of thousands of dollars in heavy demolition work. The glaring problem was, I had personally visited that specific construction site a week prior to drop off some urgent permit paperwork, and the demolition was being handled by a completely different, small local crew whose logo was plastered all over the trucks. My heart began to race. I dug deeper into the archives. I pulled the state tax records for Apex Supplies. Then I pulled the records for Horizon Ventures and 3 other high-paid, frequent vendors on Declan's approved list. Every single one of them was a shell company. They had absolutely no physical offices, no heavy machinery, and 0 registered employees. They were all legally registered to a single post office box in a neighboring state. And the name on the initial registration documents? It was Declan's former college roommate. Declan was systematically approving fake invoices, bleeding his own father's company dry, and leaving the actual, hard-working local contractors unpaid for months. These were small family businesses, roofing crews, and plumbers who were practically begging for their money, being pushed to the absolute brink of bankruptcy, while my brother funneled $2 million into his own secret accounts to fund his lavish, untouchable luxury lifestyle. My hands were physically shaking as I printed every single document, every traced bank route, every fake signature, and every denied payment notice. I organized it all into a thick, undeniable red folder and marched directly up to the top floor, bypassing the executive assistants. I walked into Thatcher's massive, sunlit corner office and slammed the folder onto his pristine glass desk. I explained everything clearly. I showed him the irrefutable mathematical proof. I truly thought he would be furious at his son's betrayal. I thought I was saving the family empire. Thatcher did not even open the folder. He glanced at it, then slowly looked up at me with an expression of pure, freezing contempt that made my blood run cold. "Do not let your pathetic jealousy ruin your brother's future," he said, his voice dangerously low and smooth. Before I could even formulate an argument, the heavy oak door swung open and Declan strolled in. He had obviously been tipped off by an assistant. He did not look scared. He looked thoroughly amused. Declan looked at our father and shook his head with a mask of fake, exaggerated pity. "Dad, I told you she was completely losing her mind. Ever since she got pregnant, she is totally paranoid and unhinged. She is just angry because she knows she will never be trusted with real power or money in this family. I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter, Marin. I was vulnerable, exhausted, and completely alone in a room full of monsters." Within an hour, Thatcher called building security. He coldly told me I was fired for gross insubordination. He told me I was a disgusting disgrace to the family name, a delusional, bitter liar trying to frame her own flesh and blood out of spite. He pointed a shaking finger at the elevator and told me to get out and to never dare use his last name again. I was literally thrown out onto the freezing, wet winter sidewalk with a single cardboard box of my belongings. I left with a broken heart, a baby growing inside me, and a copied, encrypted hard drive containing every single piece of damning evidence. They thought throwing me out into the cold would silence me forever. They had absolutely no idea what kind of war they had just started. The harsh reality of being suddenly cut off and exiled from a wealthy, connected family is not romantic or cinematic. It is brutal, ugly, and utterly terrifying. The first few months of my new life were a grueling masterclass in absolute desperation. I managed to rent a tiny, damp studio apartment on the neglected, industrial side of the city. The winter wind howled constantly through the cracked window frames, and the ancient radiator heater was broken more often than it worked, hissing out cold air instead of warmth. I clearly remember sitting on a thin, worn-out mattress on the bare floor, holding my infant daughter, Marin, tightly against my chest to share my body heat. She had a terrible fever, hitting 102 degrees, and her small, fragile breaths rattled in the quiet, freezing room. I desperately checked my bank account balance on my cracked phone screen. I had exactly $76 left to my name in the entire world. I had to make an impossible choice between buying her liquid fever medicine or paying the overdue electricity bill to keep the lights from being shut off. I bought the medicine, wrapped her in 3 layers of cheap blankets, and sat in the pitch-black dark for 3 excruciating days. Once she recovered, I hit the pavement to find work. I was a brilliant, highly capable accountant, but every single time I had a promising, final-round interview at a reputable corporate firm, the job offer would mysteriously vanish into thin air. I later found out through a sympathetic recruiter that Declan had made a few highly strategic phone calls. He had maliciously reached out to his vast network of country club friends and corporate golf buddies, spreading a vicious, targeted rumor. He told the entire financial district that I was emotionally unstable, prone to stealing sensitive corporate data, and an absolute legal liability to any firm that dared to hire me. He systematically and gleefully blacklisted me from my own hard-earned profession. 14 different companies rejected me in a row. 14 times, I had to walk back into my freezing, miserable apartment, look at my beautiful baby girl, and forcefully swallow my rising panic. Declan and my parents desperately wanted me to break. They wanted me to crawl back on my hands and knees. They wanted me to show up at their massive, wrought iron-gated driveway, crying and begging for financial forgiveness for a crime I did not even commit, just so they could feel powerful and righteous. They wanted me utterly destroyed. But as I sat there in the dark, watching Marin sleep peacefully despite the cold, my overwhelming sadness evaporated. The hot tears completely stopped falling, and a cold, sharp, hyper-focused rage took their place. I realized that crying would not put hot food on our table. Waiting around for an apology from narcissistic people who actively enjoyed my suffering was a pathetic waste of precious time. I had to become someone they could not legally or financially touch. I had to build a suit of armor so thick and impenetrable that their generational wealth and their toxic influence would bounce right off me. They genuinely thought financial starvation would kill my spirit. They did not realize they were just feeding the very monster they created. I immediately stopped applying to traditional corporate firms where my father's shadow could reach. I went to the courthouse and legally changed my last name back to my mother's maiden name, severing the final, lingering tie to Thatcher's corrupt empire. I swallowed my pride and took jobs doing basic tax prep and bookkeeping for small, overlooked local businesses, diners, auto mechanics, and immigrant-run dry cleaners. I worked out of a cramped, humid back room of a local laundromat, using a heavy, second-hand laptop that took 10 minutes just to boot up. I worked 16 hours a day, fueled by nothing but cheap, bitter coffee and pure, unadulterated spite. When Marin finally slept at night, I relentlessly studied. I dove deep into the complex, murky world of advanced forensic accounting. I taught myself how to track deeply hidden offshore assets, how to crack encrypted shell accounts, and how to clearly read the invisible financial footprints left behind by greedy, arrogant men. I was meticulously preparing for a massive war they did not even know was coming. I was not just going to survive my exile. I was going to transform into the exact terrifying consequence my brother feared the most. The arduous transformation from a scared, broke, blacklisted single mother to a highly feared, elite forensic accountant did not happen by magic overnight. It was forged in the fire of years of relentless, agonizing, grinding work. Operating strictly under my new name, Sloan, I began taking on incredibly complicated, messy freelance investigation cases that traditional accounting firms were too afraid to touch. I helped desperate small business owners track down business partners who were embezzling funds. I helped local nonprofit charities figure out exactly why their donation funds were mysteriously drying up. I slowly became a silent ghost in the financial system, a lethal hunter of stolen money. My professional reputation started to grow organically, not in the flashy, glass-walled boardrooms of the elite, but down in the legal trenches where real, hard-working people fought desperately for their livelihoods. My massive career turning point finally came 3 years into my forced exile. A high-profile, incredibly complex federal case involving a massive corporate fraud ring was rapidly falling apart in court. The government prosecutors were completely drowning in millions of pages of deliberately manipulated data, unable to prove intent. They desperately needed an expert who could see the underlying matrix of the numbers, someone who could translate chaos into a clear narrative. That was exactly when I met Judge Calloway. She was the federal judge strictly presiding over the chaotic case. I was quietly hired as an independent financial contractor by the defense team to meticulously prove their specific client was a manipulated victim, not the actual mastermind of the operation. I spent 4 straight, grueling weeks locked in a secure room, manually tracing a dizzying web of wire transfers that spanned across 3 different continents. When I finally took the heavy wooden stand to testify in that grand courtroom, I did not just present boring data. I methodically and ruthlessly destroyed the prosecution's entire false narrative. I tracked every single stolen penny directly back to the real corporate culprits, explaining it so simply that the jury gasped. Judge Calloway watched me intently from the high bench, her sharp, calculating eyes studying my every move. After the trial concluded with a massive victory, she summoned me directly to her private chambers. She saw my raw potential and became my fierce, protective mentor. She introduced me to top-tier federal investigators, elite corporate law firms, and powerful government regulatory agencies. I systematically built my consulting firm from a dingy laundromat backroom to a sleek, secure suite in a downtown high-rise building. I commanded consulting fees that would make my father physically choke. But despite the sudden influx of wealth, I never bought flashy sports cars or ridiculous designer clothes. Every single dollar I made, I aggressively secured into ironclad trusts for Marin's future education and security. All the while, I kept a silent, watchful eye on my toxic family. I had automated financial alerts set up for my father's commercial real estate company. I knew they were bleeding cash. Declan's unchecked greed had not stopped, it had dangerously mutated. He was getting arrogant and sloppy, stealing vastly larger amounts of capital, and leaving the entire company exposed to massive, catastrophic liabilities. The dozens of small contractors he had viciously ripped off years ago were finally grouping together, actively preparing a massive, unstoppable class action lawsuit that would completely bankrupt my father's supposed legacy and send Declan straight to a federal prison cell. I held the absolute power to let them burn to the ground. I had the power to sit back in my luxurious high-rise office, pour a glass of expensive, aged bourbon, and happily watch the arrogant empire that threw me out crumble to worthless dust. But as I watched the legal filings mount, I realized something profound. Letting them fail on their own was entirely too easy. It lacked a certain poetic justice. I had a massive moral debt to pay, not to my abusers, but to my own unshakable sense of justice. There was a highly specific, calculated move I needed to make before I could truly face them on a battlefield of my choosing. I was going to use my newfound immense power, but in a totally unexpected way that would ultimately become their most agonizing, humiliating defeat imaginable. The sickening irony of extreme generational wealth is that it often makes people completely blind to real human value and consequence. Declan genuinely thought he was an absolute financial genius for stealing from blue-collar contractors who could not afford high-priced corporate defense lawyers. He walked around feeling completely untouchable. But the massive class action lawsuit was quietly looming like a dark storm cloud, and the upcoming legal discovery phase would tear the company's fraudulent books apart. If the federal courts dug into the ledgers, Thatcher would lose every single asset he owned, and hundreds of innocent, hard-working administrative employees would lose their jobs and pensions overnight. I did not care a single bit about Thatcher's fragile pride. I did not care if Declan spent the next 20 years in a concrete cell. But I cared deeply, viscerally, about the innocent workers. I cared about the single mother receptionist, the exhausted janitorial staff, and the honest mid-level project managers who would become devastating collateral damage in my family's explosive downfall. So, I made my unprecedented move. Earlier that year, I had won a massive, record-breaking whistleblower settlement from a highly complex pharmaceutical fraud case. I had legally earned a personal, after-tax payout of exactly $1,500,000. It was life-changing money. I took that money, every single cent of it, and I aggressively created a highly encrypted blind trust under a completely untraceable offshore corporate name. I hired a proxy, bulldog law firm to quietly approach the angry, desperate contractors. My lawyers aggressively negotiated a private, ironclad settlement out of court. The anonymous trust paid off every single fake invoice, every stolen hourly wage, and every accumulated late penalty that Declan had maliciously caused. We injected $1,500,000 directly into the calloused hands of the people who desperately deserved it. In strict exchange, the contractors gladly signed airtight non-disclosure agreements and permanently dropped the massive lawsuit against my father's vulnerable company. The catastrophic lawsuit disappeared like smoke in the wind. The corporate crisis was entirely averted. Back at the lavish family headquarters, Declan shamelessly took the absolute credit. I legally hacked into their internal server emails and watched him arrogantly brag to Thatcher about how his incredibly aggressive, brilliant legal maneuvering had terrified the plaintiffs away. My father profusely praised him, calling him a brilliant, unparalleled corporate strategist. They popped vintage champagne in the boardroom, wildly celebrating their survival, completely and utterly unaware that the disgraced daughter they threw into the freezing street had just purchased their salvation with her own blood, sweat, and tears. Why did I do it? Why on earth would I give up my own hard-earned money to save the very monsters who destroyed my early 20s? Because it was the ultimate, inescapable checkmate. I permanently stripped away their only possible emotional defense. When the inevitable time finally came to destroy Declan, Thatcher would never be able to look me in the eye and say, he was just doing his best to protect the family business. I took away their false narrative of competence. I bought their pathetic lives, and I held the permanent, undeniable receipt in my vault. Exactly 1 month later, the thick, heavy cream-colored envelope arrived at my secure office building. It was an extravagant invitation to Thatcher's massive 70th birthday gala. But it was not addressed to Sloane, the disgraced, forgotten daughter. It was addressed to Victoria Sloane, special guest. My father's expensive public relations team had clearly discovered my rising professional alias and my vast connections, though they clearly had absolutely no idea I was the one who funded the Saving Blind Trust. They just knew I was now directly connected to powerful federal judges, elite politicians, and massive wealth. They selfishly wanted me there as a political prop. They wanted to show the city's elite that the family was completely united, forgiving, and powerful. Declan wanted me there so he could arrogantly parade his fake success in my face and remind me of my place. I stared at the shimmering gold foil lettering on the expensive cardstock. I knew immediately, without a shadow of a doubt, that it was a psychological trap. But it was a trap I was fully, dangerously prepared to walk right into, and I was bringing the matches to burn it all down. I knew exactly what Declan was maliciously planning the moment I held that invitation. He knew through his corporate lawyers that a routine, mandatory federal audit was coming up for the commercial real estate sector. He desperately needed a massive public distraction, or better yet, a convenient, unstable scapegoat. Inviting me back into a room full of high society donors, aggressive journalists, and politicians was a highly calculated, desperate risk. He wanted to publicly provoke me. He wanted to push my emotional buttons until I violently snapped, until I yelled or made a chaotic scene, proving to everyone in that room that I was indeed the crazy, unstable, bitter sister he had always claimed I was. That way, when the millions in missing corporate funds were eventually noticed by the auditors, he could easily point the finger at the vindictive, estranged daughter who clearly had an axe to grind and a history of erratic behavior. I spent the entire afternoon coldly preparing for war. I did not go out and buy a brand new, $10,000 designer gown. I deliberately pulled a simple, slightly faded black dress from the back of my closet. I wanted them to see the exact woman they thought they broke all those years ago. But hidden securely inside my small, unassuming silver clutch, I carried a military-grade titanium encrypted flash drive. On that tiny drive were the undeniable state tax returns of all the shell companies, the specific offshore bank routing numbers, the forged digital signatures, and the absolute, irrefutable legal proof of the blind trust one had funded to save them. I kissed my daughter Marin goodbye, leaving her safely at home with my highly trusted, well-paid nanny. Mommy has to go slay a very ugly dragon tonight, I told her softly, kissing her warm forehead. She smiled up at me, completely safe and oblivious, and went right back to her coloring book. I pulled up to the grand, imposing luxury hotel in a modest, standard taxicab. The uniformed valet looked at me with a distinct hint of confusion amidst the endless sea of imported luxury cars and limousines. I walked slowly up the grand marble steps, the heavy, towering oak doors of the ballroom looming ahead of me like the terrifying gates of hell itself. I could hear the muffled, elegant classical music and the endless clinking of expensive crystal glasses. But before I tell you exactly what happened when I stepped inside that room of vipers, please take a quick second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps this video reach more people who might need to hear this message. Thank you so much for your support. I took a deep, steadying breath, pushed the heavy oak doors open, and stepped directly into the blinding chandelier light of the crowded ballroom. The music swelled around me. I navigated carefully through the dense crowd, completely ignoring the shocked whispers and pointed stares of the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had not bothered to check on me in 7 long years. I made my way purposefully toward the main head table. That was exactly when Declan spotted me. His eyes locked onto mine across the room, narrowing instantly with a toxic mix of arrogant triumph and deep-seated hatred. He aggressively grabbed a full, overflowing glass of dark red wine from a passing waiter's silver tray and walked directly, threateningly toward me, his tailored suit shifting like physical armor. The final, explosive confrontation was completely inevitable, and I stood my ground, waiting for the first strike. Which brings us right back to the exact moment the dark wine violently hit my dress. The cold, sticky red liquid dripped slowly down the cheap fabric, pooling messily near my feet on the flawlessly polished marble floor. Declan stood right there, the completely empty crystal glass dangling loosely from his manicured fingers, a look of pure, unadulterated venom on his face. "Look at her," Declan announced loudly to the immediate, silent circle of wealthy guests. "A complete and utter mess. This is exactly why we had to cut her off all those years ago. She has the nerve to show up to our father's massive milestone birthday looking like a street beggar, hoping to cause a pathetic scene just to extort us for cash. The loyal flying monkeys in our family, the parasitic aunts and cousins who lived comfortably off Thatcher's immense wealth, immediately began to nod and whisper in eager agreement. Oh, it is such a terrible shame, I heard Aunt Clara mutter loudly to a banker's wife. She always was so deeply troubled and jealous of him. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at my father. Thatcher aggressively rubbed his temples, leaning back in his velvet chair as if my mere, silent existence was a massive headache he simply did not have the time or patience for. "Can we please have the security team escort her out quietly?" Thatcher asked his frantic assistant, waving his hand dismissively. "I absolutely do not want a spectacle in front of the mayor." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the moment was almost comical. Declan physically commits an unprovoked assault in a room full of people, but I am somehow the unacceptable spectacle. I kept my breathing incredibly steady. I deliberately did not wipe the dripping wine from my chest. I wanted the ugly stain right there for all to see. I wanted every single person in that lavish room to look at the undeniable physical manifestation of my family's endless cruelty. I looked Declan dead in his eyes. I saw the very slight, betraying tremor in his left hand. He desperately wanted me to scream. He wanted me to violently slap him across the face. He was begging for my raw rage so he could instantly justify his own sickness to the crowd. "I am not leaving this room," I said, my voice eerily calm, carrying perfectly and clearly in the suffocating, quiet tension of the ballroom. I was formally invited as a special guest. And I have a very specific, expensive gift to deliver to the family. Declan laughed, a harsh, incredibly nervous sound that echoed off the high ceiling. "A gift? What did you bring us? Food stamps and coupons? Get out of here before I have you physically thrown out into the street where you belong." The tension in the air was so thick you could choke on it. 3 massive, Suited security guards were already starting to aggressively edge their way through the dense crowd toward me, their hands reaching for my arms. The guests were literally holding their breath, eager for the juicy drama but completely terrified of being caught in the crossfire. Then, a sharp, crystalline, piercing sound cut abruptly through the nasty murmurs. Ding! 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 It was the distinct sound of a heavy silver spoon tapping forcefully against a delicate champagne flute. Every single head in the room instantly turned toward table number 4. Judge Calloway stood there, her posture perfectly, intimidatingly straight, her eyes blazing with an intense, quiet, terrifying fury. The security guards immediately froze in their tracks, backing away instantly. You absolutely do not touch a personal guest of a presiding federal judge unless you want to lose your career. Judge Calloway did not raise her voice to a shout. She absolutely did not need to. True, terrifying power never actually has to shout to be heard. She stepped out gracefully from behind her lavishly decorated table, adjusting her expensive silk shawl, and walked slowly, deliberately toward the center of the room, coming to stand right beside my wine-stained shoulder. "You have the sheer audacity to call her a parasite, Declan?" she asked. The word floated heavily in the air, thick and incredibly dangerous. "That is fascinating. Truly, legally fascinating." Declan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. His arrogant, practiced smile faltered instantly, replaced by a tight, highly defensive grimace. "Your Honor, with all due, absolute respect, this is a private, complicated family matter. My sister has a long, documented history of severe mental instability and—" "Do not dare insult my intelligence, Mr. Thatcher," the judge interrupted, her voice slicing violently through his pathetic lie like a surgical scalpel. "You invited a woman to this gala hoping to publicly humiliate her, without taking even 5 minutes to research who she has actually become in the real world. Let me gladly educate you and everyone in this room." The entire ballroom of 200 people leaned in collectively. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. "This woman standing next to me," Judge Calloway continued, gesturing sharply to me, "is not a beggar looking for scraps. She is a senior, elite forensic accountant. She is the lead financial investigator who recently, single-handedly dismantled a massive tri-state embezzlement ring, saving 3 multinational corporations from total bankruptcy. She frequently consults for the federal government. She is the exact reason several very wealthy, very corrupt corporate men are currently serving 20-year sentences in federal prison." A collective, audible gasp rippled violently through the room. Sybil, my mother, literally dropped her heavy silver fork. It clattered loudly against her fine china plate. Thatcher's jaw visibly tightened, his eyes darting frantically between me and the imposing judge, desperately trying to process this seemingly impossible reality. The weak daughter he threw away like actual garbage was a feared titan in the financial world. Declan started sweating profusely. I could see the moisture beading rapidly on his forehead under the bright lights. He tugged violently at his tight collar, his brain desperately trying to find an emergency exit strategy. That absolutely does not matter," he stammered, stepping back defensively. "She is still a toxic, vindictive presence in this family. She tried to ruin our entire company years ago with completely fake accusations." Judge Calloway smiled, and it was a genuinely terrifying, predatory expression. "Oh, I am so incredibly glad you brought up your company, Declan. Because that brings me to the second, far more interesting part of her resume. But before I share that with the crowd, tell me, Thatcher, do you know who actually saved your legacy 2 years ago?" The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. Thatcher gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning completely white. Thatcher looked utterly confused, his eyes darting frantically to Declan, then back to the imposing judge. "What on earth are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "My son expertly handled the contractor disputes. He personally negotiated the entire settlement out of court. He saved us millions." Declan's face went from pale to a sickly, horrifying shade of gray. "Judge, please, this is absolutely not the time or the place for this," Declan pleaded, his voice cracking with pure terror. It is exactly the right time and exactly the right place. I spoke up finally, my voice ringing out clearly for the first time, completely cutting him off. Judge Calloway slowly turned her gaze to my father. Your son did absolutely nothing of the sort. The angry contractors dropped the massive lawsuit because a heavily guarded blind trust stepped in and paid their debts in full. A trust entirely funded by a single anonymous donor. She paused perfectly, letting the terrible suspense build in the room. She personally injected $1,500,000 of her own liquid money to pay the debts your son created. She, the daughter you threw away, saved your entire company. The massive number hit the room like a physical shockwave. $1,500,000. Loud whispers exploded instantly among the wealthy investors and bank executives in the crowd. Thatcher stood up violently, his chair tipping backward, his legs visibly trembling. He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time in 7 long years. You? He whispered, his voice completely stripped of all its former, unearned arrogance. You paid them? With your own money? Yes, I said evenly, staring right into his soul. And I certainly did not do it for you. I paid that money so honest, hard-working people would not starve and lose their homes while your golden boy was busy buying his 3rd sports car with stolen funds. Declan completely lost his mind. He lunged forward aggressively, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger right at my face. It is a lie. He screamed, literal spittle flying from his lips. It is a completely fabricated lie. She is a broke, pathetic loser. She made fake documents back then to frame me, and she is making them right now. Do not listen to her. She is crazy. His absolute panic was ugly, raw, and desperate. He looked frantically around the room, expecting the loyal flying monkeys to blindly back him up, expecting his rich, powerful friends to intervene and save him. But incredibly wealthy people are fiercely, viciously protective of their own money. The exact moment they smelled legitimate corporate fraud, they backed away from Declan as if he had a highly contagious, lethal disease. I calmly reached into my small, unassuming silver clutch. My fingers brushed past my lipstick and closed tightly around the cold, heavy metal of the titanium flash drive. I pulled it out slowly and held it up high under the bright chandelier light for everyone to see. I do not expect you to just take my word for it, Declan, I said softly, the microphone picking up every syllable. I am a forensic accountant. I always bring the receipts. Judge Calloway's assistant, a highly efficient, sharp young man in a dark tailored suit, stepped forward immediately. He took the silver flash drive directly from my hand, walked swiftly over to the AV station set up for the birthday slideshow, and plugged it right in. The massive, high-definition projector screen behind my father, which was supposed to show a heartwarming, fake montage of Thatcher's glorious life, flickered instantly to life. Instead of smiling family photos, the massive screen filled with highly detailed, color-coded spreadsheets. Bank routing numbers, state tax identification forms, and pristine copies of cleared, massive checks magnified to 10 feet tall. I confidently grabbed a microphone from the wooden podium. Let us look closely at the corporate records, shall we? I said, my voice echoing powerfully through the surround sound system. Apex Supplies. Horizon Ventures. Summit Contracting. All companies paid millions by this firm over the last decade. All of them are completely fake shell companies. And right here. I clicked a button on the remote, bringing up a highly magnified, scanned incorporation document. Is the official registration form. Signed cleanly by Declan's college roommate, but legally funded by an IP address originating directly from Declan's corner office inside your building. The room erupted into absolute, uncontainable chaos. The undeniable, legal proof was staring them right in the face. Investors who had millions of dollars tied up in Thatcher's new downtown projects were already pulling out their cell phones, frantically dialing their aggressive legal teams right there in the ballroom. And right here, I clicked again, bringing up a heavily redacted bank statement, is the official wire transfer from my personal legal trust, clearing the massive debt Declan maliciously left behind. $1,500,000. Declan was hyperventilating, struggling to breathe. He looked exactly like a trapped, panicked animal. He aggressively grabbed his father's arm, his fingers digging into the expensive suit. Dad, listen to me. She hacked the system. She set me up. You have to believe me. I was trying to protect us. But the evidence on the screen was absolute and legally binding. It was the one language Thatcher understood perfectly: cold, hard numbers. Thatcher looked up at the massive screen, reading the exact dates, recognizing the exact, massive dollar amounts he had blindly signed off on, completely trusting his son. The horrifying realization hit him like a runaway freight train. He had thrown away his brilliant, innocent daughter and willingly handed the keys of his massive empire to a sloppy, greedy thief. Thatcher violently ripped his arm out of Declan's desperate grasp. "Do not ever touch me," Thatcher hissed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple with rage and utter humiliation. Declan stumbled backward awkwardly, hitting the edge of the grand cake table. The golden child was entirely dead. The manufactured illusion was permanently shattered. And the brutal financial slaughter of my family's legacy was just beginning. The corporate fallout in that luxurious ballroom was instantaneous, vicious, and completely brutal. A highly prominent bank executive sitting at table 2 stood up abruptly, angrily buttoned his suit jacket, and looked directly, furiously at my father. "Thatcher, we are pulling all of our funding from the Downtown Plaza project effective immediately. Expect a hostile call from our lawyers first thing in the morning." He turned sharply on his heel and walked right out the door. Within 5 frantic minutes, over $10 million in pledged investments walked right out those heavy oak doors. Thatcher was standing completely frozen, watching his entire life's work evaporate into thin air before his very eyes. Sybil was openly, loudly weeping now, burying her face in her trembling hands, her perfect, expensive makeup completely ruined. The loud flying monkeys who had insulted me just minutes ago were suddenly very, very quiet, staring intensely at their expensive shoes, terrified of being associated with the exploding scandal. Declan's arrogant, impenetrable facade completely collapsed in on itself. He literally fell to his knees amid the dropped linen napkins and spilled champagne on the floor. It was the incredible pressure. He sobbed loudly, his voice high, weak, and pathetic. "You do not understand the immense pressure, Dad. You expected so much from me. I just needed a financial safety net. It is all her fault. She should have just kept her mouth shut like she was told." He was incredibly still blaming me for his own crimes. Even completely destroyed and caught red-handed, a true narcissist will never, ever take accountability. Thatcher looked down at his sobbing, pathetic son with a toxic mixture of absolute disgust and profound, life-altering sorrow. "You are absolutely no son of mine," Thatcher spat venomously. Then, slowly, heavily, my father turned his gaze toward me. The powerful man who had ruthlessly commanded boardrooms for 40 years suddenly looked incredibly small, incredibly old, and incredibly fragile. He took a slow, hesitant step toward me, his hands shaking visibly. He looked at the massive red wine stain, still dripping slowly from my black dress. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice broken. "I mean Sloane. My brilliant, wonderful girl." The hollow words made my stomach turn violently. I felt absolutely nothing for him but a cold, clinical, forensic detachment. "Please," Thatcher begged, his voice cracking pathetically in front of the remaining guests. "You know the books. You know exactly how to trace the hidden funds. You can help us fix this massive mess. We can fire Declan tonight. We can easily make you a full, managing partner in the firm. Whatever you want. Just please, help me save the company. Please come back to the family." He was desperately offering me the exact crown I had wanted 7 long years ago. He was finally offering me the validation, the lofty title, and the conditional love I had desperately craved as a child. He genuinely thought the transaction was simple. Give the abused scapegoat some power, and she will happily fix the mess. I looked down at the completely broken, desperate man begging pathetically in front of me. I looked at the loudly sobbing brother curled up on the marble floor. I looked at the mother who only ever cried when her comfortable money was threatened, never once crying when her own daughter was thrown out into the freezing winter night. I slowly, deliberately raised the microphone back to my lips. My voice was incredibly steady, completely void of any lingering anger and completely void of any sadness. It was the calm, terrifying voice of a woman who had already won the war many years ago. "I did not come here tonight to fix your broken company, Thatcher," I said clearly, the sound echoing off the high, painted ceiling. "I did not come here to be your managing partner, and I certainly did not come here to ever rejoin this highly toxic family." Thatcher flinched violently as if I had physically struck him across the face. But you paid the massive debt," he stammered. "You saved us once already." "Why?" "I saved the innocent workers," I corrected him sharply, my voice turning to ice. "I paid that money so honest, hard-working people would not starve and lose their family homes simply because of your blind, stupid arrogance. You stood by and did nothing while my brother destroyed my professional name. You threw me and your unborn granddaughter onto the freezing street to protect a greedy liar. You do not want me back because you love me. You want me back because I am suddenly useful to you now. And I absolutely refuse to be used by you ever again." I placed the heavy microphone gently on the edge of the grand cake table. It rolled slightly and stopped right next to a gleaming silver cake knife. I turned gracefully to Judge Calloway, who was watching me with a look of profound, immense respect. "Thank you for your time, Your Honor," I said quietly. I deliberately turned my back on my father, my mother, and my brother forever. I began walking slowly toward the main exit. The massive crowd of wealthy elites, the exact same people who had stared at me like a disgusting parasite just an hour earlier, now parted immediately like the Red Sea. They stepped back quickly, clearing a wide, respectful path for me. No one whispered a single word. No one sneered. All they saw was a powerful, untouchable woman walking calmly through the smoking wreckage of an empire she had single-handedly dismantled with absolutely nothing but the hard truth. I stepped out of the grand ballroom, the heavy oak doors closing loudly behind me with a final thud, permanently sealing them inside their own self-made hell. The legal aftermath of that night was incredibly swift and absolutely merciless. Within 3 short weeks, the federal authorities aggressively raided the company headquarters. Declan was heavily indicted on multiple federal counts of wire fraud and grand embezzlement. Because the major investors pulled out immediately, the company was legally forced to file for total bankruptcy. Thatcher permanently lost his prestigious seat on the board, his life's reputation in absolute ruins. The golden child had completely burned down the family castle. Thatcher sent me desperate, rambling letters every single week for a year. Thick, tear-stained letters constantly apologizing, begging to finally meet his growing granddaughter, begging for just one chance to explain himself. I returned every single one of them completely unopened. Sybil tried to show up at my secure office building once. My armed security team escorted her right off the premises before she even reached the lobby elevator. I drove home that incredible night to my quiet, incredibly safe, tree-lined neighborhood. I walked up the paved driveway to my beautiful, spacious house, bought entirely and securely with my own hard-earned money. I unlocked the bright blue door, a massive door I painted myself to constantly remind me of clear, sunny skies after a terrible storm. I walked into the warm, incredibly quiet house, slipped off the ruined, wine-stained dress, and threw it aggressively into the trash where it finally belonged. Then I went softly into Marin's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed bear securely. I kissed her warm forehead, feeling a profound, overwhelming, unbreakable sense of peace. The absolute best revenge in life is not actively destroying the toxic people who hurt you. The universe will usually do that for you eventually. The absolute best revenge is building a beautiful, rich, completely peaceful life that they are permanently, legally banned from entering. They are forced to miserably watch you thrive through locked windows, knowing they willingly threw away the key. But the complex story does not completely end there. Even now, many years later, Thatcher still leaves sad, pathetic voicemails on my office phone every year on Marin's birthday. His tired voice sounds weaker and more desperate every single year. He begs for just 5 minutes to see her, to desperately apologize to her for what he did to her mother. So, I want to turn this difficult question over to you, the jury. My broken father still calls every single week, practically begging to finally meet his granddaughter. I haven't answered a single call. Do you think I should give him one last, brief chance to apologize in person, or should I keep the blue door permanently closed to fully protect my peace? Tell me your honest verdict in the comments below. And if you strongly believe in always protecting your peace over toxic blood, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. Until next time, stay strong.